First of all, good afternoon and welcome to the Detroit Opera House. I am Arthur White, Director of Community and Audience Engagement here at the company. I am joined by Nathalie Doucet, the head of music and the director of Detroit Opera's Resident Artist Program. Thank you so much for being here, my partner in crime.
Thank you, Arthur, and thank you, everyone. We're so thrilled that you joined us today for our opening of our double bill with Down in the Valley and Highway 1 USA. It's the first time both of these operas have been performed on our stage in our 54-year history.
That's right. And I'm particularly thinking of Highway 1, which is an opera I've known since I was in high school, way back in the 80s. And so to finally see this production on the stage is very exciting. I did want to just apologize that we were a little late today. There's some technical issues that were being handled so that the show moves perfectly this afternoon. So thank you for your patience. We'll move quickly. You know, in just 8 months, we as a nation are celebrating our semi-quincentennial. Try saying that 10 times fast.
I won't.
Our 250 years of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So the operas this season, we're looking at our identity, celebrating contributions to the form, and of course, looking ahead to our next chapter. So today we're going to talk briefly about the history of these two operas and their composers, and then we're going to have three special guests, three people who really helped to bring these two operas to the stage. You're going to hear more about what you're going to see and hear. But first, we're going to start with Nathalie to tell us about Down in the Valley.
Yes, I have had the distinct pleasure of being in the rehearsal room during all of these rehearsals, and it's been so wonderful to watch our creative team bring this together for you today. Arthur asked me to talk about Kurt Weill. I've known about Kurt Weill's music for a long time. I remember in my studies, one of the first things I saw singers do were Kurt Weill songs, so I was fascinated from then. Kurt Weill was born in Germany on March 2nd, 1900, makes him a Pisces, just like me, if that's of any interest to anyone. He really made a name for himself in Germany when he composed works like the Three Penny Opera. But after he premiered The Rise and Fall of Mahagony in 1930, Germany was occupied by the Nazis, and Kurt Weill, being a Jewish man, and his wife Lotte fled Germany to come and be in America. And Lotte, just a little note, was not just his wife. She was a wonderful singer, and she was also his muse. And it is said that a lot of his songs were written with her in mind, and she was really one to help him solidify himself as an American composer when they came to the United States. And it's really an understatement to say that Weill reinvented himself in the States. He's known to have written, I'm going to read this, I'm not a refugee composer, I'm an American composer. He fell in love with the United States and wanted to celebrate American culture with music. So he goes on to find great success in Hollywood and the Broadway stage with works like Knickerbocker Holiday, Lady in the Dark, One Touch of Venus, and Street Scene, which is his most serious and dramatic work for the stage, with the libretto by Langston Hughes. He went on to win Best Score, a Tony for the Best Original Score in 1947 for Street Scene. And some of the most famous pieces you might know from Street Scene is What Good Would the Moon Be, Lonely House, these beautiful arias, and it's kind of an opera that a musical that crosses over into the operatic style. You need opera singers to sing this, in my opinion, because it's quite hefty music. Today, Down in the Valley is what we would call a folk opera, and it was conceived at first to be on radio. Now, Arthur, you and I are much too young to know this, but back in the day, apparently, you could listen to shows on the radio, and they would tell you stories, and it would be like watching a series on TV today. And you'll see that today. We portray a little bit of the radio history, and I'm sure Kaneza will talk about that in just a moment. So he wrote it initially for the radio. It was very short. Then he revised it and made it a little longer because he wanted to bring it out into our communities. He wanted to bring it out to universities and celebrate this folk opera. And we call it folk opera because you're going to come out, and I promise you, because it's been in my head since we started rehearsals, the tunes from Kurt Weill's Down in the Valley will stick in there. They're really lovely and very sweet. And it's no wonder that schools now want to do this as their first operas for young singers, but what we're doing today is elevating it to the the realm that you will see with our wonderful, wonderful cast. And there was also a chorus in it, and it serves kind of like a Greek chorus where they comment and help you understand the story moving along. Kurt Weill was very much about celebrating flawed characters and stories that really tug at your heartstrings. So I think today will be a good example of that. Down in the Valley weaves several traditional American songs into this tragic tale of love and loss between two teenagers, Brack Weaver and Jenny Parsons. And that's pretty much all I have to say about Down in the Valley, but it's a wonderful gem, a really, truly operatic gem.
Fantastic, thank you. And I should also mention that our visionary stage director, Kaneza Schaal, also with Christopher Myers, our production designer, who was inspired by quilting traditions, have produced this dynamic vehicle to tell these two Black American love stories with such a stunning artistry. So I'm going to talk a bit about Highway 1, William Grant Still. He was born Mississippi, 1895, a part of the Harlem Renaissance. He studies at Wilberforce University and Oberlin Conservatory. He's known as the Dean of African American Composers. He was the first African American to have an opera premiered by a major opera company, New York City Opera, in 1949 with his work Troubled Island, and also for his very first symphony, the Afro-American Symphony, which premiered in 1931 and for 20 years was the most widely performed symphony composed by any American. He goes on to compose 5 symphonies, 4 ballets, 9 operas, and 30-some choral works. Now, Highway 1 is about a young African-American married couple, Bob and Mary, who own a filling station. Remember those filling stations? Who make great sacrifices as they navigate the promises and pressures of attaining the American dream. So we're going to go quickly now to bring our 3 guests in. The first is our stage director. She's a New York-based artist in theater, opera, and film. She received the 2025 Doris Duke Artist Award, the 2024 LA Opera Stern Artist Award, and a 2021 Guggenheim Fellowship, as well as many others. Detroiters will remember her the last time she was here in 2021 with the opera Blue, a stirring experience that she created on the stage of the Aretha Amphitheater, Kaneza Schaal. So she's going to probably make her way. Our next person on our panel is, he serves currently as our music director, been here since, I believe, I can't remember which month it was, but 2022. He's been making important debuts, it seems, every 5 minutes or so. In fact, he's making his Metropolitan Opera debut on April 11th in Puccini's La Boheme. Roberto Kalb, he's coming in here. Thank you, sir. And to lead the conversation is Detroit Opera's own Barbara Wachowski, artistic director. He debuted with us during the pandemic in 2020 with his Twilight Gods. He, too, is making his Metropolitan Opera debut on March 9th with his production of Wagner's Tristan und Isolde, which will also be live in HD on March 21st. So tune in, Mr. Yuval Sharon.
Hello, everybody. It's great to see you all. You are in for such a treat this afternoon. It's an afternoon of discoveries, and it's an afternoon of exploring the American perspective in unexpected ways, I think. And it is fantastic to be here with the 2 leaders of this production, Kaneza and Roberto. And my first question to the 2 of you, in preparing the audience for what probably is the first time anyone is going to be hearing this music. It is the first time that Detroit Opera is doing the music of William Grant Still. It's not the first time we're doing Kurt Weill, but has anyone ever heard the music of either of these pieces? A couple hands. Okay, great. And of course, Arthur has heard this. Arthur, you don't count. These are rarely done pieces. And when I was sitting in the rehearsal, I felt like I had this incredible opportunity to experience what it was like to go back to the 1940s and the 1950s and think about America with so much potential, so much possibility, the notion of creating an American identity, of course, with all of the problems involved in what that meant. We have an African-American composer who really loved opera and had so few opportunities to see his operas seen on the stage. And we also had a Jewish emigre coming to America and trying to figure out what is the language of American music and how do I take this language and put it on the stage. Two different perspectives at the same exact time trying to find their way into what an American classical music might look like. And so I'm going to start with you, Kaneza. In putting these two pieces together, Highway 1 USA you had done previously in Los Angeles. As you're putting these characters together, did you try to make a through line between these two pieces, or are you thinking to yourself you want to offer the audience a kind of larger panorama?
I think what was exciting to me was to create two very different storytelling structures for each of the works. And that is because the works themselves demand two very different storytelling structures. As we've talked about, Kurt Weill wrote Highway 1 for the radio. And so as I was first listening to it, I heard the dialogue, I heard all of the exquisite orchestration. You feel that kind of Germanic compositional vocabulary coming in with this love of American vernacular sound, and I'm convinced he was spending time in the Lomax files and hearing all of that sound. I have no proof, but I'm convinced. And I thought, okay, so the structure for hearing this sound is actually not made for the stage. It's made for the radio. It's made for intimate speaking. It's not made for performers playing it to the mezzanine in terms of these spoken moments, you know? So how do we really create a theatrical structure that is built for how this man composed this sound? And so you see a few little indications on stage left and right of some of how I was thinking about what is the structure for listening to this. And similarly with Highway 1, I've told this story before, but when I was first listening to it, I kept getting lost in Still's strings. I kept getting swept away, and I was like, oh, I'm in a 1950s film. I can't find the opera. I'm like in a film score. I can't find the opera, and I would set it down and figure it out, and then I had this realization that, you know, that sound that I was thinking in my head was a 1950s Hollywood studio sound. That sound was built by musicians with instruments on their back, fleeing in the same way that Kurt Weill had fled to the United States, and that rise and swell is the rise and swell of Puccini, it's the rise and swell of Wagner, it's the rise and swell of Verdi, that Hollywood studio sound, that is utterly operatic, that rise and swell. And once that clicked in, that helped me think about how the stage needed to move with that music. And so you will see in Highway 1, a lot of the thinking was about the kind of kinetic structure, the physical structure of that orchestration, and so how the stage can move with the sound. So we have two very different storytelling structures for you tonight, and two different visual worlds.
Beautiful, and that's so exactly what you're going to experience. Roberto, how about from your perspective, specifically the orchestra? I think these are two incredible masters of orchestration, and yet quite different. I'm curious if you could talk to us a little bit about what the music feels like from the orchestra's side of things.
Yeah, there's very different composers, but both have a very direct lineage of study with great orchestrators. So they have a great grasp of how to compose for the orchestra. You might even think that for the Grand Still that you would hear a lot of the jazz influence in the orchestration, but you actually don't, which is really interesting. It sounds more like you were saying, it harkens back to a very romantic orchestration, so like almost like a Tchaikovsky symphony or something like that, very beautifully, lushly orchestrated. And in the Weill, you get more of like the stereotypical Americana, sort of like cup trumpet sounds and very sort of old school American sound. And yeah, there's a guitar, there's saxophone, which you don't have in opera often unless you go back to the, sort of like a big French opera. And actually, since the saxophone was invented in France. Okay.
Before we taught everybody how to use it.
That's right. You're totally right. And I was going to say that while none of you have, or maybe a few of you have heard these tunes, the Kurt Weill uses three big American folk tunes that you probably must have heard at some point in your lives. And when I was first studying these pieces, I was like, I have heard this somewhere in my life. And then I discovered that, yeah, there are these folk tunes. And I was speaking to some people that were in the dress rehearsals, and they had heard it on the radio when they were kids. So as you listen to these pieces, I think you'll find there's familiarity with the music itself. Still has a great deal of spirituals. You'll just feel the great influence of spirituals in the music. And since we were talking like of influence of teachers, you know, if you are a fan of Russian music, for example, Eugene Onegin, any of the Tchaikovsky works, there's a direct connection to church music of the Russian Orthodox Church, and I think in the same way, for still the spiritual is in the DNA of the music, and you'll experience that for sure.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. In doing the research on Highway 1 USA, I came upon this quote, and this is from Catherine Parsons Smith's biography on William Grant Still. And she takes us to the moment when William Grant Still had his first opera premiered in 1948 at the New York City Opera. His first opera was called Troubled Island, and this was a really bold move for New York City Opera at the time to do an opera about the Haitian uprising. And if we can imagine, in a way, this is a really strong connection for Detroit opera audiences, too. If you came to see our production of Anthony Davis's X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X, it was also New York City Opera that premiered that opera some 40 years later. But 40 years prior to that, it was unheard of for an African-American composer to get this kind of experience. And that he chose that subject like the Haitian uprising as the subject. The revolution, exactly. Because of that, he saw his future opportunities for operas really shrink up. And the next opera that he wrote was this opera that you're going to hear tonight. But his biographer had this to say, that as the audience was sitting waiting, she said that William Grant Still could not simply compose as himself, allowing his cultural background to speak for itself, because his audience was unwilling to recognize anything in his cultural background but the clearest possible references to the spirituals or the stereotype-laden reviews he was orchestrating for a living. So how were they to hear his visible otherness? Still clearly wanted to explore new musical territory and express his ideas with integrity, whatever the audience or venue. And he found himself in a unique balancing act, one that often sought a centrist path that was not always understood from either direction. I think we get in that quote the paradox that Still faced his entire life, and I also see a connection there with Kurt Weill in many ways. And so I just wanted to read that quote and offer you both a chance to potentially respond to that sentiment. Kaneza, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I think the American cultural institutions have been sleeping on William Grant Still's music, and I am so proud and honored to be with you all in Detroit, of all places, of all musical lineages, to be hearing this sound. I think Still is a really complicated composer. You know, he was, as that quote mentions, you know, he was working with Harry Pace at Black Swan Records. He was working with W.C. Handy, which already just in kind of Black American sound is a really complex organism to be with both of those men. And he also was studying with the French boys. He was with Edgar Varèse, who's one of the great kind of experimental composers in France. And I think when we hear Still's music, he is so clearly both in his ideas of what he is trying to send forward and in the composition itself, he is trying to build a new possibility. And with that comes some complication. With that comes a little elitism, a little talented 10th respectability politics issues. And with it also comes a vision of an America and a possibility for orchestration, a possibility for living and relating to one another that is utterly new and is utterly his ferocious dreaming of new possibility. And that's what I hear in that quote, and I am so glad we get to listen to this music together in this city tonight.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you. Roberto?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Weill is really very straightforward in its language, right? So really, it's Americana, and it's the tunes, and it's beautifully composed, and very, sort of, it is what it is. And the still is unique. I don't talk about a composer that has a very clear voice, and there's no question that it's still. Something to listen out for, I guess, would be something just so you can have. The very first melody you hear in the orchestra is the main motive of the whole opera. And it's arguable whether it's Mary's motive or whether it's their life together. But you're going to hear that theme warped in 500 different ways. You're going to hear it super fast when there's a very dramatic event at the end. You're going to hear it super slow in the basses in the middle of the opera. You're going to hear it in the choruses. And so there is, when you listen, you don't hear necessarily the complexity of what's going on underneath. But there are many clues to his studies with Varese and these composers where the structure of the piece is actually very, very complex. But I think the great mastery of composers is when they are able to achieve their own language. And so what I believe is that he was telling a story though in his own way. I believe that the best kind of art is selfless art. And the greatest composers are the composers that just do. And the pieces are themselves just by, or the greatest conductors, or the greatest piano, etc., or directors, The art is selfless, and I believe that this piece just tells the story from his perspective, and what comes out is just all of his background in a very beautiful way. I think you'll really enjoy it.
Can I add one thing to
Of
that?
course, please.
In hearing what Roberto just said, it's such a pleasure to hear him talking to you all. I have the pleasure of hearing him talk in the room, but it is also special when you are speaking to them. That repetition he's talking about the central motif in Highway 1, one of the things that I learned early on in listening to the music was the libretto itself, it reads almost with the crispness of a morality play. A little sitcom moment. You can think of a 1950s sitcom set, you can think of a crisp morality play. But the music is not that. The music is not offering a moral condemnation of any of these characters. It is not telling you what to think about them. And so in that repetition of that motif, I also think there's this invitation to all of you to think about to think about that story from a lens that is not moralistic and that is actually about perhaps trickster logics and more complex ways of telling and hearing stories.
That's beautiful. A very quick last question before we let everyone stretch their legs before the opera begins. We initiated this season under the question of America at 250. Has it lived up to its promises? Very briefly, I think an opera like this one is meant to invite us to ask that question, to think about that question. I think it offers a wonderful answer to that personally, but I wanted to just give you both a chance to have your own answers to that. Because I think I know the answers to that, and I think it's going to let us go off on a very happy foot. So I'm going to turn it over to Kaneza first.
I am going to say that sadly, yes, I do think America has fulfilled the promises that it made. And what I think we get to do tonight together in listening to both of these exquisite American composers who come from exile, who come from margins, who come from diasporic traditions intersecting the most utterly American logic, what the birth of American opera. We get to stand on their shoulders, these two dreamers who dreamed new worlds, and we get to write together what our new promises to each other are going to be. And that's what these men have asked.
I think for me it's an interesting perspective because I wasn't born here. You can tell a little of the accent, not a little bit. I was born in Mexico City to a Jewish family. And I moved here when I was 18. So for me, the States, the US is like the best thing in the world. For me, I always wanted to live here. When I lived for 2 years in Berlin, I couldn't wait to get back. And so I think being able to tell these stories as an immigrant in front of this wonderfully diverse crowd is an incredible highlight that really can only happen, I think, in a place like this. We can all discuss whatever we think about politics or whatever is going on, but today I feel really fortunate to be able to share this with all of you, so thank you.
Thank you all so much. And enjoy the performance this afternoon.
Please help me thank our guests, Mr. Kaneza Schaal, Roberto Kalb, Yuval, Sharon, and Nathalie Doucet. Thank you all so much for being here and enjoy the performance. I would ask if you're already in your seat, fantastic. If you're not, when you go to get up, could you just lift up your seat so folks can walk down the aisle and enjoy the performance. Thank you so much.